Hello, and welcome to this series that asks the question, if God is love, then why is there evil and suffering in this world? That is a question that a multitude of people ask, and they ask it in a lot of different ways. Years ago, a gentleman, I believe he was a rabbi, wrote a book, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? Our perspective and our thought is that people are good. Why do bad things happen to them? People also say, where is God when bad things happen? We look at what's going on in the world, the crime that is there, the murders that take place, the rapes that take place. Certainly when there's a school shooting and we see innocent little children being shot down by other students, we back up and say, and people often say, where's God? Why did he let such a horrific thing happen? Why do these things even exist? Why doesn't he put a stop to this? There's so much sickness in this world, and there's cancers, and there's different diseases and deformities, and all of these things taking place. There's so much suffering, and there's pain, there's hunger, there's starvation in the world, there's wars going on all the time. Wars taking place, and we have the threats of terrorism today. Why doesn't God put an end to this? Why does God allow innocent children to suffer? We hear stories, horrible stories of child abuse going on, children being abused throughout this world, being abused in their own homes, children getting sick and dying, having different diseases and deformities. We see on TV the commercials for St. Jude's Hospital, working with the children that have cancer, and it's a fantastic work that they're doing. It's really tremendous. Or you might see the Shriners are on there working with the different children, and we look at that and we go, I sit back sometimes and I look at these kids and I look at these images here and I say, Lord, how long? How long is this going to go on? It's painful. It's heart-wrenching. And we could just go on and on with the lists of terrible things that are going on. And then people turn around and they say, if God is all-powerful, not only if God is loving, but if God is all-powerful, why doesn't he put an end to evil and suffering now? Why doesn't he stop it now? And others say, you know what? Why should I even believe in a God who allows these horrific things to happen? If he's loving and he's merciful and he's kind and he's gracious and he's forgiving and he's all-powerful and he's all-knowing and he's not taking care of this problem, why should I even believe that such a being exists? There's a British author, his name is Paul Johnson. He writes concerning this very thing, and he says, I suspect that the problem of evil drives more thoughtful people away from religion than any other difficulty they have in believing. This problem of evil and why God doesn't take care of it. Many people believe that if God is truly a God of love and mercy, he would be bound by his own moral character to deal with these situations and to prevent suffering in this world. Julian Huxley, who is a very strong proponent of evolution, he writes, the existence of evil is a challenge to God's moral character. The existence of evil is a challenge to God's moral character. Years ago, there was a survey taken among a large group of people, and they said to the people, if you could ask God one question, what would that question be? And the number one answer was, why is there suffering in this world? Why is there suffering in this world? These are very real questions, and they're very understandable questions. You can understand why people would ask these things and would want an answer to them. That's what we're going to attempt to answer. God willing, we're going to answer these things in this series. It is a series because it's not a quick snap answer. I could give you a quick snap answer. I could give it to you in one sentence, what the bottom line cause is for all this evil and suffering in the world and why it's going on. But one answer, one sentence answer is not sufficient. We need to understand. We need to build a foundation here. We need to have some. We're going to put the answer on the top of the but if you don't have that foundation, you're not really going to understand the answer, or you're going to look at it and go, I don't think so. So we need to build a frame around this so that we can properly understand. So before we start to look at the answer, though, and this is part of the foundation, there's 3 things that we need to remember. 3 things that we need to understand before we look at this. Number 1, this side of heaven, while we're here on earth, we have limited understanding. We do not understand everything. We do not comprehend everything. We do not see everything clearly. We think we do. Many times we think, oh, I understand exactly what's going on. I understand. I got the whole picture. It's all here. We don't. Listen to what God says. 1 Corinthians 13:12. For now, while we're here on earth, for now we see in a mirror dimly or darkly. We don't see clearly. We see in a mirror dimly. But then when we go to be with the Lord, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. So what he's saying is we don't understand everything clearly right now. We don't have a clear vision. He says we look in a mirror dimly. Now we look in a mirror today, and we have these real nice shiny glass mirrors, this and that, with all kinds of lights around them, and you get a pretty good reflection of what's there. And the day that this was written, they didn't have mirrors like we have mirrors. They would have like a piece of metal that they would, polish it and try to make it shine a little bit so they could get somewhat of a reflection out of it. They got somewhat of an image, but they looked at that. It wasn't like us looking at a piece of glass today. They kind of go, there I am. Is that me? I mean, I just, kind of like, it's a reflection, but it's not clear. It's dim. It's dark. It's not really that accurate kind of a thing. You can't see all the little details, maybe is a better way to think of it. We don't get. Well, God is saying that's when we look at certain things in the world today, we don't have all the details. We don't see it with the clarity that we think that we see it. We are hindered by our own understanding and by our own reasoning. We need to remember that we're coming the way we see things, not necessarily the way God sees them, certainly not as clearly. Secondly, and this is very important, we need to remember that our perspective of things is not God's perspective. We not only don't see things clearly, we don't see them the same way God sees them. We don't come from the same perspective. We might not have the same motives. We may not have the same objectives. We may not have, and oftentimes we don't have the same end game in mind. Oftentimes you look at things and say, why is the person doing this, and why is the person doing that, and why is the person doing this here? Well, they have a different ending in mind, or a different end game, or a different picture, and they're getting there a different way, different perspectives. Our minds have been limited and affected by sin, and so we see things our way, the way we want them to be. Listen to Isaiah 55. Verses 8 and 9. Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. For my thoughts, this is God speaking, and he says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. God says, you and I, we don't think the same. We don't have the same perspective. We kind of tend to judge everything by what we think is fair. What's fair? What's reasonable? How would I do it? If I were God, I wouldn't handle things like this. Well, that's getting to the very root of our problem. We're going to break that down. I don't want to get ahead of myself. But we want to be in charge. And we want things done the way we think they ought to be done. And from what we think is right, and from what we think is wrong, and from what we think is fair, and what we think is unfair. We want to make up our own rules and have our own definitions and have whatever we want, and then we think God should act that way accordingly. And if he doesn't, well, guess who's wrong? God. We may not say those words, but that's how we start to think. Or if things simply don't happen the way we think we should, we just either God's unreasonable, or God doesn't care, or there's something wrong with God, or maybe there just even isn't a God, because God isn't doing it the way I would think it should be done. God says, my ways are not your ways. And guess what? My ways are infinitely higher and better than your ways. We need to remember with our perspective, normally, most of the time, our perspective is now. What's going on in my life now? What's happening now? God's perspective is eternity. He's looking for what's going to be taking place in eternity, because eternity is so much bigger and so much more important than now. But we as human beings, we're primarily interested in now. I remember years ago the comedian Flip Wilson. He was doing one of his skits, and he was the pastor of the church of what's happening now. I'm the pastor of the church of what's happening now. And he would say, we don't tell you what happened a long time ago. And we're not going to tell you what's going to happen in the future. We tell you what's happening now. Very good comedic routine, but we think that way oftentimes. And God says, you know what? I'm concerned with what's happening now. I'm concerned with those things, but I'm more concerned with eternity. Why? Because now, and now not only being today, now being our lifetime, is like a flick of a light from God's perspective. Think about it. God says in Scripture that our life is like a vapor. It's like a puff of smoke that it comes out and just you watch it vaporize before your eyes in only a matter of seconds. It's like the petals on a flower or something. You know, they bloom and this and that, and then in a very short time they wither and die. And God is saying, if you look at your life, well, you know, we sit back and we say, what, 60, 70, 80, maybe 90 years. Ooh, that's a long time. Compared to eternity, God says it's next to nothing. It's a blink of an eye almost. It's like, let's say we live to be 90, okay? What is 90 years compared to 9 seconds? Compare 9 seconds to 90 years. Maybe these are terms that we can understand. 9 seconds would be, we wouldn't even think about it. It's nothing. It's just like 9 seconds. That's just, boom, it's gone. Well, when you take 90 years and compare it to 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 100 million years, 1 billion years, we still haven't touched eternity. What is the meager little... See, that's what God says. So it's not like, nah, don't worry about the 90. I don't care about that. I don't care about you. It's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying eternity is so much more important than these little 80, 60, 70, 80, 90 years that we have. That's God's perspective. He is primarily concerned with what's going to happen with us for eternity, because every one of us are going into eternity. If you're alive, if you've been born, you're headed to eternity, either in heaven or in hell. But you're going to live forever in eternity, and God cares about that. So we need to keep those things in mind. Our understanding, our vision is limited. We see dimly right now. We don't understand everything clearly. Secondly, our perspective is not God's perspective. And guess whose perspective is right? God's. Okay? Our way of thinking is not God's way of thinking. God doesn't approach everything the way we approach it. And so we need to understand that. And then the third thing is that the more we know and understand God, the easier it is for us to grasp and understand and relate to what's going on now. And by that I mean the more we study God, the more we learn of His attributes. By that I'm talking about the holiness of God, the righteousness of God, the justice of God. This affects every area of our life. The mercy of God, the grace of God, the love of God, the forgiveness of God. The more we understand those things, and the more we comprehend of what God is like, the easier it is for us to accept what is going on and to try to understand it. When we understand that God is holy, and that means that God cannot do anything that is wrong, He is absolutely without sin, He is perfect, then when we look at things where we go, I don't quite understand what's happening here. Well, I don't understand the specific circumstances or actions, but I know God. And I know God is holy. And I know He always does the right thing because He's righteous. I know that God can't sin. I'm going through a particular hard time right now, but I know that God said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Well, I know I don't understand this. I don't understand why I'm going through it. I don't understand why this is happening, but I know God. And I know God can't lie. And God said He'll never leave me. He'll never forsake me. So even though I don't understand, I don't see clearly right now, and my perspective isn't lining up, I know God. I understand God, and He's faithful, and He's just, and He loves me, and He's fair, and all these characteristics that you could build, that helps you to understand and accept what God is doing, even though we don't clearly understand it, or even though it doesn't line up with our perspective. Okay? So we keep that in mind as we're going through and what we're studying here, and those are great things to just keep in mind with every area of our life. Not just why does God allow evil and suffering? Every single area of our life. Alright, so let's begin. Let's start looking at it. Let's start answering this question. If God is a God of love, God is all-powerful and a God of love, why does He allow evil and suffering in this world? Number one, remember this. God did not create this world with evil and suffering in it. When God finished His creation, when He made this world, He made this planet, and He made mankind, listen to what He said. Genesis 1:31. And God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. That was His that's like an understatement, but that was His proclamation of everything that it was made. It was very, very good. And that addresses the question that we hear oftentimes, that people say, why didn't God create a world that didn't have tragedy and suffering in it? If He's all powerful and He can do whatever He wants, why didn't He create a world that didn't have all of this pain and suffering and sin and everything else that's going on in it? And the answer to that question is very simple. He did. That is exactly what He did. He created a world that did not have all of this evil, pain, and suffering in it. When He created this world, it was a paradise. It was perfect. It was without sin. Well, if He didn't create it, how in the world did it get here? Simple. Through His created beings. His created beings are twofold, what we're looking at here. The angels that He created in heaven and mankind that He created. And what happened is that both of them rebelled against God. They made a choice to rebel against God and to go their own way. The rebellion and the fall of God's creation brought sin into this world. Well, then that leads to the next question. Well, if that's what caused it to come in here, then why didn't God make beings that couldn't rebel against Him? See, we're always challenging God. And in some sense, it's a logical question. Some sense it's a logical question, but it always comes with that underside of, it doesn't line up with what I'm thinking, and it doesn't line up with the way I think. If I were God, then I would have created beings that weren't able to rebel against me. I would create a place that was perfect, and it just absolutely had to stay perfect. That's what I would do if I was God. Well, number one, you're not God, and I'm not God. And number two, that's a statement like that would say, you don't understand everything. You don't understand everything about God. Let me explain that. Understand this. God is love. Now, this is part of the foundation that we're laying here, because this is a strong part where everything else is built upon it. And it explains why God is doing things the way He did them. You may not agree with it, but it's explaining why God has done things the way he's done them and what he's doing. So number one, God is love. And when I say that, understand that God just doesn't simply choose to be loving. God doesn't get up one day and go, you know what, I'm in a good mood today. Boy, I had a good night's sleep and a good dinner before I went to bed. And, things are just wonderful. The birds are chirping. The flowers are blooming. Everything's just well. I'm just going to be very loving and gracious today, That's not God. When we say God is love, we're saying his very nature, his very being is love. It's who he is. It's what he is. It isn't something he turns on and turns off. He's happy today. He's not happy tomorrow. He's loving today. He's not loving tomorrow. God isn't like us where we get in our moods and can do with certain things. God is love. Love exists because God exists. Love exists because God is love. So understand that. And God existed in eternity past in a Trinity. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And there's a unity there. And there's a love between them. There's a bond. But at some point in time, Scripture doesn't tell us when. Doesn't give us all the details. But God created beings. Living beings that he could love. And in return wanted them to love him back. That's what true love is always like that. True love wants to express its love and it wants to be loved. But in order for true love to take place, the person loving you has to do it willingly and freely. Love is always a voluntary choice. That is critical to understand. True love always involves a voluntary choice. You cannot force someone to love you. You cannot make someone to love you. You may wish that they loved you. You may want them to love you, but you cannot make them love you. Love is always a voluntary choice. You cannot program someone to love you. I remember years ago there was this doll that they made. I think its name was Chatty Cathy. Doesn't matter. But anyhow, you would get this little doll, and on the back of the doll was a ring. Back of the doll was a ring with a string, and you'd hold the doll and you'd pull the string, and the little doll would go, "I love you, I love you," and you pull the string out again, "I love you, I love you," and it was a nice thing to hear. But here's my question: did that doll really love that little girl? No. The doll has no emotions. The doll has no feelings. The doll has no understanding. The doll has no comprehension of who is holding them. And the bottom line is, no matter who pulled that string, the doll would say the same thing. That cute little 5-year-old girl goes up, pulls the string, and the doll says, "I love you." Adolf Hitler comes in the room, pulls the string, and the doll says, "I love you." Because it's not real, it's programmed. And programmed love is not real love. That's exactly the situation with God. God, could he have programmed someone to say, "I love you"? Sure he could. Could he have made beings that just automatically said, "I love you"? Sure he could have. But God is no fool. God would know that that's not real love. Because God knows what real love is. It is something that he expresses to people, and he wants that back in return. He wants that from his creation. He wants people that love him and that he can fellowship with. He wants a two-way street. I want to love them, and I want them to love me. That's what he wants from his created being. So in order for that to happen, in order for God to spend eternity with beings that love him and that he could love, he had to give them a free will. He had to give them the ability to choose to love him, to choose to honor him, to choose to follow him. And the problem is, he gave his creation that choice. He gave the angels in heaven that choice, and he gave mankind that choice. And the problem is, they chose to go their own way and do their own thing. They chose to rebel against God. If you look at, I'm really going to capsulize this, but if you look at the angels created in heaven, I'm not going to read it all, but it's in Isaiah 14, verses 12 through 14. That talks about the creation of the angelic beings, how the angels were in heaven, and the highest angel was Lucifer. And he was the bright and shining and morning star. And one day Lucifer, just got together and he said, you know what? I don't want to worship God. I don't want to love God. I don't want to follow God. I want to be God. I want to be my own God. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. He wanted to overthrow God, rebel against God, and have people worship him. And the scriptures tell us that a third of the angels of heaven that God created followed Lucifer and rebelled against God. That's when the first sin entered God's creation, because of the rebellion of some of his created beings. 2/3 of the angels did not. They stayed with God, they loved God, and they're in heaven today. God took Lucifer and cast him out of heaven. That's when Lucifer became Satan. And the angels, we call them fallen angels that followed Lucifer, they're the demons that we talk about today, that you have today. And God put a judgment upon them. So now after this is a real quick capsule picture, God creates mankind. And he takes mankind and he puts him in paradise. He gives them everything that they could possibly need. He's loving them. He's caring for them. He has provided for them. And he gives them everything that they need. He puts them in paradise. And he says, of all the trees that are in here, you can freely eat. You have everything that you want. You're safe. There's no sickness. There's no death. There's no suffering. There's no pain. There's no crime. There's no disease. There's none of these bad things. You have everything at your fingertips. Just one thing. See, here's the choice. I put one tree in the garden. One tree. That one tree, don't eat from it. If you eat from that tree, the day that you eat from that tree, you will die. Not because the fruit was poison, because that would be an act of rebellion against God. That would be man saying, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to follow you. I'm not going to love you. I'm going my own way and doing my own thing. And that's exactly what happened if you read it in Genesis 3. Satan came into the garden because, see, he fell. So now he doesn't want anybody else to follow God. And he tempts Eve in the garden. And in the end it says that Eve looked at the fruit. She thought it was good for food. See? Doesn't matter what God said. I think it's okay. She thought it was good for food. She thought that it would make her wise. It would make her smarter than what she is. She thought there was no reason for her not to take it, that it would make her better off. It would make her like a god. So it says she reached up and she took it. And then she gave to Adam, and he disobeyed also. They went their own way. They did their own thing. They said in that act, we're rejecting God and his authority over us, where we're putting ourselves first. We want to be gods. We want to be our own masters. We want to be our own lords. We're going to love ourselves, more than we love God. So we're going to disobey him and go our own way. Because God said, the day you eat from there, you will die. And when they did, that's when death, sin, sickness, disease, rebellion, all of these things came into existence. It's because of the rebellion of God's creation that these things came about. God did not make it this way. God did not want it this way. And you could turn around and say, well, what's the big deal? I mean, what's with God? I mean, is he some kind of egotistical maniac? I mean, you have to love him, and if you don't love him first, and you don't put him first, and you don't let him be your Lord, well then he's just what? He's going to snuff you out like a bug, and he's just going to put all of this punishment on you because you just didn't do what he said. I mean, what's with him? I mean, how high does he think of himself? What is it? See, once again, we're thinking on a human level. We're trying to make God like a man, and how a man would do those things, and how a man would say, you have to follow me. And we look at a man and we go, who in the world do you think you are? But with God, it's different. Why? Because sometimes I don't know how to express this other than because God is God. He's God. He's not a man. God is perfect everything. everything that is good, everything that is right, everything is perfect with God. God is perfect love. God loves us, and he loves us perfectly. God has all wisdom. No one is smarter than God. No one knows better than God. God is gracious. God is compassionate. God cares for us. No one cares for us more than God does. When I say God has all knowledge and God has no wisdom, no one knows better for what we should do than God. You follow what I'm saying? So when God says, love me, you can't love anything more perfect. That's the highest form of love. When God says, listen to me, what he's actually saying is, I know what is absolutely best for you, and he does, because he's God. So if you listen to me, you will have the best. He's actually wishing the best, wanting the best for us by saying, listen to me. Don't go your own way, because you don't know what I know. You don't have the knowledge that I have, and your desires can become corrupt. My desires are not corrupt. It's almost like, it's just a comparison here, not a perfect comparison, but it's almost like you have problems in your life and this and that, and there's this counselor over here, and somebody comes to you and says, this counselor over here, and let's say it's true, he has all wisdom. He has all understanding. He knows every answer to any problem that you could have. And he will give you the best answer that is for you. He will look out for you. He will do the best thing for you. He has no evil motives. He has no evil intentions. He has nothing personally for himself. He knows the perfect answer to give to you so that your life can be perfect, happy, and blessed. Now, would you be wrong to say, you need to go talk to that person? You need to go to that counselor. Here's his name. Here's his address. Go there and you listen to what he says. Because anyone else you listen to, including yourself, is going to be worse than him, because he's got it all. It would be the right thing. You're thinking the best thing for that person to say, go and talk to that person and listen to what they tell you. Now, we know, humanly speaking, there is no person like that. But God is like that. And so God is saying, I am the absolute best that you could follow. So it's not egotism, it's not self-righteousness, although God is all righteousness. It's not like there's something distorted and warped with God. He is wishing and commanding the highest good for his creation, and following him, and in worshiping him, and in loving him, because there is nothing higher. He is actually wanting the best for us. And man said, no. We know better than you. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to go our own way. And we're going to do what we want. And that brought all of what we talk about, the evil, the sin, the rebellion, the sickness, everything else into this world. Now, why did God let that happen? Why did God bring those things in? That's what we're going to look at. And that's what we're going to answer. Because there is a loving, logical answer for everything that God does. And remember, as we said in the beginning, God has eternity in mind, not just this present world. God has eternity in mind. In our next lesson, that's what we're going to start to deal with. Why are these things here? We'd see why they're here, because we rebelled. But why is God doing it this way? Thank you for watching. I hope you'll continue to watch. May the Lord bless you.